Hello everybody, it's Nick here with Nick Tolman Music, and today we're going to go ahead and continue our beginner guitar lesson series using the Hal Leonard guitar method, Book 1. Let's get started. Alright, so today we're going to take a look at page 37 here in the Hal Leonard guitar method, Book 1. As always, before we get started, I will toss out a quick reminder to head on over and check out my Patreon page if you haven't already. I have a lot of great resources on Patreon available for you that will help you out along your journey of learning to play guitar. Some of these resources include early access to YouTube content that's coming to you here. You can get it early over there on Patreon, so it can be really helpful for you if you're really trying to plug ahead and make some progress. I have extra exercises, worksheets, things like that that are helpful as well. But the biggest thing that I'm really excited about is our weekly guitar series on Patreon, where I answer questions that are from you, my patrons. So if you're working on a particular exercise or you're having a particular struggle with something on guitar, ask those questions on there and I will target those lessons specifically to those questions that you're asking. It can be really helpful for you, and you can become a patron for as little as $3 a month, so definitely go check that out. Alright, so on page 37 we are going to learn one new song called Boogie Bass, which is just a fun little kind of the start of like a blues bass line concept. And then we're going to learn kind of tagging onto our bass strum thing that we talked about a few lessons ago, and we're going to kind of work a little bit more on that in the second exercise. So yeah, getting started, I'm going to go ahead and play Boogie Bass for you. I'm going to play it at 72. We're going to talk about it really quick, and then we will bump that tempo up. But here it is at 72 on the metronome. Exercise 87, Boogie Bass. 1 and 2 and ready and play. All right, so that's that. So this is cool. This is really getting into a whole realm of guitar playing, which is the blues, right? And when we play the blues, there's a couple things that you need to be aware of. First off is that the blues is a 12-bar form, almost always. I mean, there are some kind of variations to the blues that are 8 measures or whatever, but in general, the blues, we conceptualize it as a 12-bar form. So it's always a 12-measure kind of repeating cycle. And it's always going to start with the 1 chord. So whatever key you're in this case we're in the key of G, it's always going to start with the G chord, right? And you're going to play that for 4 measures. And then in the 5th measure, you're going to move to the 4 chord, which in this case is going to be C for 2 measures. And then back to the 1 chord, or G, for 2 measures. And then for the last 4 measures, we're going to go 1 measure of the 5 chord, which is D in this key, 1 measure of the 4 chord, in our case C, and then back to G for 1 measure, or for 2 measures. Sometimes that last measure will add another chord or multiple chords, what we would call a turnaround, to get us back to that original chord. All right. Now there's a lot of variations on that. This is the absolute most basic concept of the blues at this point. All right. Now you might have noticed when we played this that it didn't sound super bluesy, and that's because it is missing one really important concept that is important for the blues, but at this point we haven't really talked about them, so that's why it hasn't introduced it yet, which is the use of dominant 7 chords. We have learned the D7 chord, so that can be used, but Usually in the blues, we're going to use a lot more of that. So definitely like that 4 chord, you're doing like a C7 chord, which I'll put the diagram right up here for you for a moment so you can kind of see what that is. Just a C chord, but we're going to drop that pinky down onto the note B flat, which is going to be the 3rd fret of the 3rd string, right? That's going to be a C7 chord. Yeah, I mean, if you want to start playing with that on this one, I would highly recommend it because it's just going to make it more bluesy, more fun, right? And then also using a G7 chord instead of a G is also going to be totally okay or appropriate in this context. All right, so a couple things when you're actually learning the notes on this melody. First off, make sure you're using just all down, up picking, because we're going to want to be able to play this faster than what we just did. And that down, up is going to be really important. And we're just kind of doing that walking bass line. And really, it's kind of a real consistent motion that you're doing with your left hand. Once you learn those first 2 measures, which is mostly just open strings and 2nd finger. We do the 3rd finger for that first note. That's going to be basically the same concept when we move to the C chord in the 2nd measure of the 2nd line. We do have the 1st finger up here for the C, and then back to G. And that's kind of the concept there. It's just a fun one to play. So just spend some time working on it, start slow, and just slowly build that tempo up. One more thing that you can do if you want to make it a little more bluesy. And I do this with my students all the time. Whenever I'm sitting in person with in a lesson with this song, I always recommend this. So to actually make it a little more bluesy, we're going to change a couple notes. So we're going to play. Right, so in the first 2 notes of the 2nd measure, if you want, play an F natural right there. And every time we're doing the G version of that riff, you can always play that F natural. And then when we go to C, same exact fingering. Instead of playing that high C, we can play the note B flat, which I know we haven't talked about flats yet in the book, but we just talked about that C7 chord, right? That's where that comes in, is that C7 chord, is that note. So when you go to the C, we've got the last measure of the 2nd line. Instead of playing that high C, try playing the note B flat, which is going to be your 3rd finger on the 3rd fret of the 3rd string. 3rd finger, 3rd fret, 3rd string. And it's going to be a little bluesier. Back to G. F natural. And then from there you can just play it down. Right? If you want to play with that, by all means, please do. And it's just going to make it a little bit more fun, a little bit more bluesy, make the riff actually a little more enjoyable to play. So I'm going to go ahead and play the chords for you, and I'm just going to play them exactly as they are in the book. I'm not going to do the 7 chords or anything like that. And I'm also going to show you the melody as it's written in the book so you can hear exactly what's on the page. If you want to take some of those suggestions to alter it, to make it more bluesy, by all means do, but this example is going to be straight from the book. So here we go. Here is Chords and Melody at 72, Boogie Bass. 1 and 2 and ready and play. right, so I was using a technique in there that is called palm muting. We haven't talked about this yet, but I really like it on this one, especially when we take it at a faster tempo. It kind of just jams a little better. So all that's happening when you palm mute, instead of just strumming and letting the chords ring, you actually place your hand right on the saddle here, right on the bridge, and then strum, and you get that kind of muted sound. Right? So it's a great sound for these kind of like bluesy rockin' riffs. So play around with that a little bit. It's called palm muting. Again, all that's happening is I'm still strumming, but I'm just resting my hand right on the saddle. And you can experiment with coming a little bit further onto the strings or a little bit further off for the tone that you want. But if you get too much on the strings, it's just going to kill the sound. You got to kind of basically just be right on the saddle. Right, so that's palm muting. All right, let's go ahead and take this up. We're going to try it at 144 on the metronome, and that is going to give us a little bit more at that rockin' tempo that we would want to hear this at. All right, so here we go. Boogie Bass at 144. 1, 2, or 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. There it is. Let's go and try it with the chords. Here we go. 1, 2, or 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And that's the idea. You notice on that one I kind of played around with sometimes palm muted and sometimes not. Like as I was going into a new chord, I'd kind of unpalm mute, let the sound open up a little bit, and then back to palm muted for that driving kind of feel. All right, so let's take a look at exercise 88. Now this one is really just expounding on the concept that we've already talked about several times so far in the book, which is whenever we're doing that down, down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up strumming pattern, that we can use bass notes only for the first and third beats, right? So instead of, we can just go down. And it makes it a little bit more interesting, a little bit more typical for maybe especially a country, bluegrass, gospel kind of realm of playing. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and try that on this one. It's just actually officially teaching us this concept, even though we've talked about it several times before. So I'm going to set my metronome at 72. I'll play it for you once. We'll talk about it a little bit, and then I'll bump the tempo up. But here's 72 on the metronome. 1, 2, and ready, and play. Repeat. Okay, so that's the concept. Again, we're just playing a down, down, up, down, down, up, but we're doing root of the chord, strum, root of the chord, root of the chord, strum, root of the chord, strum. Now what is the root? Root is just the note that the chord is based off of. So if it's a G chord, the root is G. If it's a D chord, the root is D. If it's an E minor chord, the root is E. Super simple concept, but that will help you know where the root is. Now, eventually this concept can be taken a step further, which we would do something like root of the chord, strum, fifth of the chord, or I guess fifth of the chord for G, root of the chord, but that's something that we can talk about a little bit further. If you want to start experimenting with that, it's a great place to start working on it. And even if you don't necessarily know and understand what the fifth of the chord is, which we're not really going to dive into right now, that's okay. The concept is that you start with the root, strum, and then pick a different note from the chord. You're not doing anything with your left hand, you're just picking a different note. So it could be the third of the chord or the fifth or whatever. It doesn't really matter in this particular sense as we're just starting to experiment, but getting used to pick, strum, pick a different string. So that can be something that you can play around with and see what kind of sounds you can make that way. All right, let's try the tempo a little bit faster. Here's 120 on the metronome. Good goal tempo to be able to work yourself up to. And here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, and ready, and... And that is our lesson for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please leave those below, and I'll do my best to answer those for you. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so, and please stay tuned for our next guitar lesson. We'll see you next time. Thanks.